Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. Somehow an entire year has gone by again. Over a year ago, I did the 2023 MiSTer FPGA Year in Review Roundup, and we're back for 2024. And when I say this year's been even better than the last, I 100% mean it. So we're going to go over all of the awesome things that came to MiSTer FPGA in the year of 2024, and I'm sure I forgot stuff, not intentionally, it's just been a busy year. And before we get too far involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But let's kick it off with the Nintendo 64 core, because this was basically finished in 2023, but Robert FPGA Zoomspas came back in 2024 with the help of a few other people on Discord, myself included for a very small part, to get more games running in Nintendo 64, to update the core, to update the turbo core, and to give us even more innovation and development on the Nintendo 64 side of things. And trust me, the new turbo core is absolutely rock solid amazing. It gives you such a better frame rate in so many games, as the side-by-side comparison shows here. And it was so much fun to get more life out of Nintendo 64 in 2024. There was maybe 5 or 6 games that did not run, stuff like Conquer, Jet Force Gemini, Battle for Naboo, that now 100% work on the core with absolutely no issues. But again, getting a new updated turbo core, giving stuff like Perfect Dark a basically close to 45 to 50 frame per second rate is just something that was absolutely incredible to see in 2024. Obviously Nintendo 64 seems to be buttoned up again, but honestly I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see at least one update in 2025. It seems like Robert always comes in and finds one more thing he can do with the core, and that's just absolutely incredible, because again, to get performance out of Nintendo 64 like you see on the screen here, while still using FPGA technology and not software emulation, just something nobody expected to see, and it's been absolutely incredible to follow along with the progress. Nintendo 64 has been like an 18th month odyssey. I've been covering it since the first core showed signs of life, and it's been so much fun to go over this stuff and over the spring and summer, giving you guys more updates on Nintendo 64 with some of the most fun I've had on MiSTer FPGA this year. And it is so wild to think that less than 2 years ago, no one would even talk about Nintendo 64 on MiSTer unless they said the impossible core. Robert came along in 2023 and finished up in 2024, proving to us that nothing is impossible when you set your mind to it. And before you ask for a DS core that is impossible, you have to wait for the next piece of MiSTer hardware. You never know, maybe 2025 will be the year for that. But let's move over to the Sega Saturn core. Obviously SRG 320 has been destroying it this year with all of the updates. We just recently got interlace video fixes for both HDMI out with bob and weave interlace, as well as fixes for direct video mode on RetroTink 4K and more 4K. There's been so many updates to this core, fixing stability, fixing bugs in games, getting better performance out of certain games, improving dual RAM and single RAM support in some of the fighting games like Dead or Alive that had a little bit of slowdown. Basically, SRG 320 has been bringing this thing close to the finish line, and I feel like maybe in the first half of 2025, the Sega Saturn core will be buttoned up. But as I always love to say, sometimes the last 5 to 10% of work takes as long as the first 90%, because the bug hunt is a real thing and it can be quite frustrating, I'm sure. And that's why I know a lot of you would leave comments on the Saturn preview videos saying that you knew where bugs were, and I would always direct you over to SRG 320's GitHub page to open tickets so he was aware of them. One bug in the last preview before you watch this year in review had nets in one of the basketball games that were upside down. That got fixed up in the next core, and that's why it's always important to talk about bug fixes. But the interlacing fixes have been incredible, because obviously interlaced video on modern screens don't look great. But it really has just been so much fun in 2024 to go through all of the Sega Saturn updates with everybody. It's made me particularly happy because I feel like a lot of people are discovering Sega Saturn for the first time and actually realizing just how fun it is. And that's been something I've been talking about on the channel since I started it, just how good Sega Saturn was as a console and a library, and just how many incredible games people actually missed out on thinking the Saturn was a failed console. It wasn't Sega's best effort, but the library 100% has hundreds upon hundreds of games that are absolutely worth playing, and the fact that a lot more of you are playing those on MiSTer FPGA today just makes me happy. So leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite Saturn game you played on MiSTer in 2024 was. Now, something that nobody expected to happen, a fall addition to MiSTer FPGA, is the Atari Jaguar core got more active development work, and it went from running like 5 games total to basically almost the entire retail library. The core is not done, it's still work in progress, it's very RAM sensitive, and some games will not run on certain setups, but I'm sure that'll all be fixed up in the future. And even though Atari Jaguar, definitely not the best console out there, has enough games that you really do want to play, this is amazing thing to get over on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, and it also sounds great. So here's your first sound sample, listen, and I'll be right back. Sounds absolutely incredible, and that's one thing about the Atari Jaguar core. The sound seems to be 100% spot on, but again, this is something nobody really expected to actually see anyone pick up Atari Jaguar development and try to improve it, and it is all down to the builds in Quartus and how they basically string together. The Atari Jaguar is pushing at the upper limits of what MiSTer FPGA is capable of, but I'm sure you will see improvements and innovations come to the core in 2025, and considering the market on Atari Jaguar hardware and games is absolutely way too expensive, only for the most hardcore of collectors, this is definitely going to be amazing to have on FPGA, because while stuff like Big PMU is incredible on the software emulation side of things, having a Jaguar FPGA core is a welcome addition to the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem. And again, even though it has a small library and is considered a failure, there are a decent amount of games that are must-plays in my opinion. Alien vs. Predator, Rayman, stuff like Doom here, an excellent version, and NBA Jam, which you'll see in just a moment, also a classic version of the game. So leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you tested the Atari Jaguar core yet or not? I feel like a lot of people are waiting for this thing to hit update all, and I have absolutely no idea when that's going to happen. So if you're going to leave that comment down below, the answer is going to be no clue, sometime in 2025. We'll just have to wait and see. Now let's move over to the software side of things, because obviously this is the year that the MiSTer FPGA clones hit the market, with Taki Udon and Retro Replay's Mr. Pi leading the charge, and this has been incredible for the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem. I cannot stress enough just how happy I am that more people are able to obtain MiSTer FPGAs for a lower cost and get into the FPGA gaming fun that we're all involved in, because I want MiSTer FPGA and FPGA gaming in general to grow a metric shit ton in 2025. The more people that have MiSTers, the more support for core developers, the more viewers for video, and the more fun everyone is having. And that is definitely being aided by these clones. The QM Tech clone does exist as well. I just have the leftover footage from the Mr. Pi review. And getting MiSTer FPGA to a sub $200 cost has been great, and the nice part is the DE10 Nano clone board in the middle from Taki Udon and Retro Replay is compatible with basically every other accessory out there. If you want to put it onto something like MiSTer add-ons, JAMA boards, you can 100% do that. You can use different IO boards on this thing. Really, you can just grab the DE10 Nano clone in the middle and run with that with your own build, or you can get the triple stack in a case, call it a day with MiSTer FPGA, and have a fully featured setup. And that has definitely been something to celebrate in 2024. I'm sure in 2025 we're going to see more of Taki Udon's clones, the stuff like the handheld, the consoles, even what seems to be a CRT style television with a MiSTer FPGA inside of it. And I can't wait to see what comes to MiSTer FPGA on the hardware innovation side in 2025, because there's still a lot of life in this board. There's still a ton more cores that could run on it, and I'll be talking more about that in the year to come. But leave me a comment down below and you tell me what's the one core you'd love to see. Now, we basically got the IRAM M92 core towards the end of 2023, but Wickerwaka came back in and basically rewrote near to half of the core to get better performance out of it in 2024. And if you're not familiar with IRAM's M92 platform, it has some of the best arcade games not made by Sega, Capcom, Namco, or SNK that have ever been made. It is just one of those boards. It has so many incredible games, something like In the Hunt here, a pseudo bullet hell shooter is just incredible. Or R-Type Leo, a very fun R-Type game that didn't start life as R-Type, that if you want to buy an arcade board for, is going to be incredibly expensive, and in some situations on this core, the performance is better and less bug-free than MAME. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely love MAME as a project and advocate for it all the time, but sometimes FPGA can actually get a little bit ahead of MAME, and that does help MAME software developers kind of get some of those fixes in as well. And that's always important to see these different groups working together: software emulation developers, FPGA code writers, people that are researching PCBs and the like. It is really fun to see all this information be shared around between people. But if you haven't ever played the IREM M92 core, I can't recommend it enough. Pretty much every single game on this arcade board is a hit. It is one of the best libraries outside of something like Neo Geo or Capcom CPS and CPS2, and it has some of the most colorful fun games on it that you'll ever play. Stuff like Ninja Baseball, Batman here, I'm always advocating for being one of the best hidden gem beat-em-ups of all time. And if you play this on MAME, the intro does have a little bit of glitchiness in some of the attract sequence that isn't here on MiSTer, and that's always nice to have the most perfect version of the game, because again, if you want to buy a PCB for this one, you better bring your wallet. You're talking about a rent or mortgage payment. So the fact that Wicker Waka went back in and basically recoded a lot of this was just incredible. And you also have the turbo version of the core as well, or a turbo mode. So in the games that do have slowdown, you can fix. And this board sounds incredible on FPGA. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. Be right back to show you more. Incredible game and incredible soundtrack, but let's go from arcade boards to European computers and consoles, because the Amiga CD32 got a lot more support in 2024. Amiga Vision brought over near to the entirety of the CD32 library, and this is definitely a platform that I have basically no experience with, and that's been one of the fun things about 2024 for me. I've been asking more of you to recommend Amiga games. I've been playing some of them in the background, and I've definitely been finding some stuff that I've been enjoying, and big thanks to Amiga Vision for doing this entire software package, getting it all set up in the core so that it is basically just plug and play, click a button and you're off to the races enjoying games. That is the fun part about MiSTer FPGA. It's not just new cores, it's not just new hardware, it's also people going through and setting up the cores for you, providing these software packs so that you can basically just sit down and play. Because for some people, tinkering around with MiSTer FPGA is half the fun. For other people, they just want to sit down and play the games they're interested in checking out. And Amiga Vision with the CD32 setups have done exactly that. It takes down the entire barrier of entry to play CD32 games. And while again, just like the Jaguar, maybe not the most successful console of all time, there is stuff on here that is worth playing, and there are some specific versions of the software that either are different for Amiga CD32 or have CD soundtracks because of the CD format. So it is one of those things. There are a ton of games that you might want to check out, and because I know the Amiga Vision guys hate every single time I show Rise of the Robots, I'm going to close out the Amiga CD32 portion of this video with more Rise of the Robots. All jokes aside, this is one of those games that people always point to say the CD32 was not a good console, but it is one of the most hilarious fighting games of all time, so I always want to show it to people, even if it is just for the laugh. Now moving back over to the arcade side of things, Hotego and his team brought us the X-Men Konami beat 'em up, and honestly this was one of the most requested arcade cores of 2024, and it is now here. It has support for 4 players. You can bring 3 friends along for the ride if you can find that many, and you can have an absolute ton of fun. And it really makes me optimistic to see what Hotego and his team have in mind for 2025, because there's still a ton of Konami arcade board games that we don't have on MiSTer FPGA yet, and tons of Konami arcade boards that could run on MiSTer based upon the technical specifications of those arcade boards. And I always love to wonder what we might see in 2025 and what might be possible, and I will have more videos in the new years about other arcade boards and platforms that would run on MiSTer FPGA, because at this point in time, pretty much the entire console library that MiSTer FPGA can run is on the system, outside of stuff like Virtual Boy, 3DO, and PCFX. But there's hundreds upon hundreds of arcade games, not just on the Konami side, that we could be playing in 2025 on MiSTer FPGA, but we'll just have to wait and see. Stuff like Metamorphic Force, Bucky O'Hare, Violent Storm on the Konami side alone would be incredible to get on MiSTer. But the fact that we now have 2 of Konami's most well-known beat-em-ups, The Simpsons Arcade as well as X-Men, is just so much fun, and these are great games. And trust me, I do have an X-Men board in the closet, and if you want to actually set up 4 players when your friends come over, it is an absolute C complexity and mess of wires. With MiSTer FPGA, you can hook up 4 USB controllers and play almost immediately. And speaking of Hotego and arcade cores, we also got at the beginning of this year a Proteus DA core, and trust me, he released a lot more than just this, but if I covered every single Hotego update of 2024, it would require its own 30-minute video, and this is basically just a greatest hits of the year. But Proteus DA is just one of those games that's an absolute classic, and even though it got ported to a ton of consoles, the arcade original is still the original, and I love it. And it has a great soundtrack that sounds great coming out of MiSTer, so here's your third sound sample, and I'll be right back. Classic game, classic soundtrack, and it's something that you can play on MiSTer FPGA today. And if you're still watching, I know we got a lot more to go and we're going to have a lot more fun with this. But again, Hotego's been killing it in 2024 with the Konami cores, and I can't wait to see what 2025 brings. Hopefully at least one more Konami hit. Moving over to something completely different, Slammy's been working on the Philips CDI core, and this is another one that absolutely nobody saw coming. Nobody ever expected to get a CDI core, and not many people really thought it would ever come to MiSTer FPGA. We're at the point now that a decent chunk of the library does work. None of the DVC games, that digital video cassette add-on, are working currently because that isn't in the core, but there's other ways to get full motion video out of the CDI, as you can see here. And when I say the CDI library is absolutely over the top weird, and I don't have any idea what some of the games are doing, I 100% mean it. But it's an absolute vibe, and it is another piece of preservation on MiSTer FPGA side of things, and it is great because 1, the CDI is not a cheap console to purchase, and 2, it is apparently very temperamental. I do not have one in my collection, I've never been interested in having one, but now that we have a work in progress MiSTer FPGA core, I can experience the CDI games, and stuff like Hotel Mario, definitely worth playing. I'm not saying it's a hidden gem, it's definitely a B tier style game, but that's totally fine. Not every single new core and new game that works on MiSTer has to be one of the best games of all time, and people like Slammy coming around and giving us a CDI core has been great, and I can't wait to see what the updates bring in 2025, so maybe we can finally play Thunder in Paradise. Now moving over to the MiSTer Cast and Groovy MiSTer side of things, the MiSTer Cast software came out in spring of 2024, and I've been having a ton of fun just playing around with it. Basically, I keep a MiSTer FPGA hooked up to my PVM, and I keep it hooked up to my PC in my office, so I can send anything over from my PC to my 20-inch PVM, and I get to enjoy stuff on my CRT television that never was meant to be over there and doesn't have a current MiSTer FPGA core. And when I originally did the preview of this video, I just showed you watching episodes of Pete and Pete from my laptop over to my 20-inch PVM, and honestly sometimes at night I would just sit down and put on an old 90s TV show that I've loved when I was a kid and just watch it on my PVM, just kind of from my office having a good time. And of course we also got Groovy MiSTer as well, which is a setup for the Groovy core that basically allows you to stream in the video footage from something like MAME and play it on a CRT television, and this is just something that kind of expands the library of MiSTer FPGA. All those games we don't have cores for, like Violent Storm that I mentioned earlier in the video, you can play them on your CRT via MiSTer, or even stuff like G-Darius here. This is stuff that came out on PlayStation 1, but if you just want to sit down, use your MiSTer FPGA and play a game that doesn't exist as a MiSTer core, you can just load up something like Groovy MAME or MiSTer Cast and do that. Now back to SRG 320, alongside the Sega Saturn core, he's also been updating the 32X core, not as often, but because these do share the same Hitachi SH2 CPU, some of the innovations and improvements that go to Sega Saturn can be useful on the 32X side of things, and this is definitely great because trust me, building a tower of power, putting a 32X on top of Sega Genesis, not many people do that, and just like some of the other cores we got this year, not the most amazing library in the world, and even though stuff like Ares emulates 32X as well as the Tower of Power perfectly, getting some 32X updates on the MiSTer FPGA side of things is always amazing, because if you think about it this way, the MiSTer FPGA now has a core for every single Sega console ever developed outside of the Dreamcast, and that's never going to be something that MiSTer can handle, but I guess you'll just have to wait for the Super Sega guys to do that for you. The video game Trap House is still in full effect, at least as of the recording of this video, but all jokes aside, I bet in the next 18 to 24 24 months, you do see a piece of hardware that can run a Dreamcast FPGA core. Don't quote me on it, I have no additional information, but honestly it's just a vibe I've been getting. But there is a lot of fun to have on 32X, and now basically the entire library works. There might still be a visual glitch here or there, and I'm sure SRG320 will come back in and clean it up, maybe when the Saturn core is done. But I'm really curious to hear and maybe see what he might do after Sega Saturn. Maybe he'll take a break of a few years, definitely deserved. Maybe he'll launch right into the next thing that he wants to do. But having 32X improve in 2024 is a great time as well, because there are some games on the platform that definitely are must-plays, and for the most part I feel like most people don't actually own a 32X. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, do you have a 32X unit, and if so, what is your favorite game? And if you don't have one, what's your favorite 32X game you played? Something for me I think would just be Tempo. I've loved that version of the game on 32X with all its colors. And of course, while we have stuff like Virtual Fighter on Sega Saturn, being able to play it on 32X is a little bit of preservation history, and I absolutely love seeing stuff like this happen. So I'm sure right alongside Sega Saturn in 2025, you'll see some 32X updates as well, getting to the point where the library is perfect and you can put your 32X in the cabinet because you have a MiSTer FPGA. Now back to the hardware side of things, MiSTer Add-ons has been on a tear in 2024, giving us so many new boards. We have the Analog Pro, we have the Direct I/O, we have his new Prism coming soon. It's been a fun year to basically reconfigure your MiSTer however you want. The Analog Pro gives you 24-bit color out of the cores that support it, stuff like PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64, and that reduces down the color banding, where Direct I/O basically makes this thing a dual RAM setup with a Direct I/O board right on top, giving you analog video signal out as well if you have direct video mode enabled, and I can't wait to see what else comes up there. Moving back over to Hotego for one moment, he has updated the Neo Geo Pocket Color core as well. This one definitely is very fully work in progress. It is a little bit glitchy, but I bet in 2025 we do see some improvements on this as well. Seems like at least for the end of the year, Hotego's been planning on all of these different arcade cores, and I'm sure that he has one more surprise up his sleeve that I probably already talked about by the time you watch this video, because this one I did need to make about a couple weeks in advance for my own holiday planning. But being able to play a portable version of Neo Turf Masters on MiSTer FPGA is a 10 out of 10, and this game also sounds incredible coming out of MiSTer, your third sound sample for the video, and I'll be right back again. It does not matter which version of Neo Turf Masters you play, it is the greatest golf game ever made, and I can't wait to see what Hotego and his team have in store for 2025. I'd ask you what's the one core you want to see from him, but I know everyone's going to answer Capcom CPS3, and if you're looking for updates or information from me, I don't know anything you don't. Capcom CPS3 definitely is something that Hotego has mentioned in the past, and it is one of those pieces of hardware that would be great to have on MiSTer because it's absolutely unreliable. If you even bump it the wrong way, sometimes you can break the thing, and because it does share some similar hardware in common with the Sega Saturn core, I'm sure that will be to its benefit. But if you expect to see Capcom CPS3 in 2025, honestly, you'd probably be lucky to see it. I feel like that's probably another 12 to 18 months off, but I've been wrong before, so hopefully I am wrong again. But as far as the Neo Geo Pocket Color core is concerned, the games that do work on it work great, and it definitely is something that you should check out. And we're going to stick with a couple other Hotego things that I've loved in 2025 as well, in case you missed them. But if you've never played the Pocket Metal Slug games, definitely check them out. First off is we got a Michael Jackson Moonwalker core, the Sega arcade game, which is completely different than the Genesis game. I can't say this is my favorite game of all time, but I know a lot of you were absolutely waiting for this one and loved when it came, so that is definitely something to be excited about. Now I've got one more game also from Hotego to mention before we close the video out, so if there's anything that you loved in 2024 that you forgot about or I forgot about in the video, leave me that comment down below, because again, I'm sure I've missed some things that happened in this video. I'm doing it all by memory and just tracking my previous videos. So if I didn't include something, it isn't because I didn't love it, just because I forgot about it. It has been a very busy year. I do a ton of MiSTer videos along with everything else I talk about on the channel. So usually by the time I've talked about something, 2 days later, I've completely forgotten what I've said. But if you want to play Michael Jackson's Moonwalker today, it's on MiSTer FPGA. It's great and it's a ton of fun. But as far as maybe my favorite personal arcade core that came to MiSTer FPGA from Sega this year would be Vendetta. I just love a good beat 'em up game. I love a good Konami game, and Vendetta gives me the best of both worlds, and it really makes me hope that one day next year, Sega will shadow drop an announcement on Friday that Violent Storm, my favorite Konami beat 'em up of all time, now works on MiSTer FPGA. I could be right, I could be wrong, but we'll just have to wait and see. But honestly, Vendetta is just one of those classic games from Konami. It is a 4-player experience just like X-Men, and it definitely is something that's worth loading up the next time you have 3 friends over if you've never played the game before. It's just one of those classic Konami titles that I love. And there you have it, folks, the 2024 year in review. All of the things that were huge that happened on MiSTer FPGA. I've been talking about MiSTer for over 5 years on my channel, and I'm as excited as ever to see a whole new year of MiSTer evolution unfold on video form. But we are done. Hope you guys are having a great holiday. Tell me what you're doing down below, and I will see you in 2025 for the next MiSTer video. Bye-bye.